appreciate you inviting me to speak on this topic. And I think that it's amazing what you're doing with RainmakersConnect and the way that you're connecting everyone and sharing this amazing information during this time. So thank you so much, Christina and Lauren. Could I get a thumbs up just to make sure that folks can see my screen?
I hope you saw my thumbs up, but I'm seeing it clearly.
Okay, perfect. Just making sure. Okay, so about me, my name is Kristen Corpion. I'm an attorney. I'm a business lawyer, and my law firm, Corp Law, specializes in working with business owners in a wide range of matters, both transactional and corporate, and dispute resolution. So think lawsuits and things like that. I'm a Florida native, and I obtained my law degree at the University of California, Berkeley. I have been practicing law now for 6 years, over 6 years. And in addition to my full-time practice, I teach part-time. I've taught at the undergraduate level, and I've also taught law students at the graduate level. So I'm very much a fan of the law and what it can offer. I am a huge nerd, and I am one of those people who likes to read the fine print and enjoys reading contracts. That's what I do professionally, but personally, I think it's important to also note, that I'm a person. I consider myself one of the few happy lawyers. I love what I do. And in terms of COVID-19 and just my general interest in working with small businesses, I'm deeply affected by that in terms of I come from a family of entrepreneurs. I was raised by a single mom who owns her own small business even now. And my sister is a small business owner as well. And both of those businesses, including mine, have been affected, like everyone else, by COVID-19. And so, like most people, we all bring our individual skill set to the table. And here, what I hope to bring today is add some value in terms of the legal perspective around all of this with regard to COVID-19, SBA loans, and ways that my firm is working with our business clients to find solutions and help them through this time. So I am a lawyer, but I am technically not your lawyer until you hire me. So it's not novel, but here is a lawyer with a disclaimer. I am going to provide some general information for you today, but I think that it's important to note that first of all, the law around the CARES Act and the guidance being provided by the SBA is changing all the time. So I'm going to sum things up as I understand them right now, but some of this content, based on what's happening even in this moment, might be stale later. So bear with me and give me some patience. I think at this point, folks holding themselves out as experts on this, there are not too many experts here. I think just folks that maybe are a little bit better educated than others. And so we really want to be careful and I think patient with people who are trying to share information around this topic. While everything is changing and being updated constantly. I am also not an accountant. I think we might have some accountants listening in, and they also are a very important part of this dialogue and conversation and can really speak to the CARES Act as well. That being said, I think that it's important that everyone is sharing whatever information that they can and intel so that we're all helping each other along and really pursuing a free flow of information rather than staying silent and just allowing the supposed experts to speak. Okay, so what is on the agenda for this webinar? We're going to get to know each other a little bit, and we're going to talk mindset and then dive into the core of the topic, which is how do we find you and your business money? One of those options being the SBA loans. In terms of the getting to know you component, for folks on the line now, it would be great if you could throw into the chat what industries you work in and whether or not you own your own business or whether or not you're an employee. And if you're watching this afterwards, I think connecting through an outlet like RainmakersConnect and chatting about this and sharing information is really a key component here. Okay, on the agenda before we dive in is mindset. I know that there are going to be some additional talks about this, but we talk to business owners all the time in terms of the firm and what we specialize in. And so we're really able to take, a cross section of individuals and figure out and get a very close and personalized look at how they're handling their business. And in terms of success markers, a big one, and everyone writes about this, right? Books like Think and Grow Rich. Mindset is key here, and so we want to make sure that we're thinking with an abundance mindset, and that we're thinking of creative ways to add value to your specific consumer base. And it is true that if you believe you can't grow at this time and you completely put the brake on things, right, then you won't grow. And I realize that, certain industries are impacted by this more than others. I realize there are government, local, and federal directives that are making it extremely difficult for entrepreneurs to do what they were doing just a month ago. But nonetheless, some of the business owners that we've seen are really creative and thinking about ways that they can add value at this time, even in the midst of the pandemic. So one goal in terms of getting you paid and finding you money is to ensure that you're remaining creative and thinking about ways to serve your consumer base. Okay, and so that's all good and well, but the conversation that we want to get into is how do we get money for our business now? And I'm happy to address that. One step that we want to talk about is what liabilities can we get off of your back right now? We're going to talk about SBA loans and also free money grants. Step one for you, and what we advise our clients when they call us, is to take a list of all the liabilities that you have, right? Who do you owe money to? And start making some phone calls around that list. For example, a big ticket item for most small business owners is their rent. Perhaps you have a commercial lease. One of our clients pays $70,000 a month on their rent, and their business is substantially impacted by COVID-19, and they're really concerned about how they're going to make that rent payment. And a good place to start is understand your lease. So find it, of course, read through it, but give your landlord a call and see if there's an opportunity for you to work together and negotiate a solution among you. If that isn't working out, perhaps an opportunity could exist to get a lawyer involved, but the initial recommendation is just pick up the phone and see, what folks who you are in business dealings with are willing to do to help you out. A good question to pocket is, what is your company doing to help small business owners that are affected or that are otherwise impacted by COVID-19? It's a nice open-ended question that you can use when you're calling your credit card company, when you're calling your commercial landlord and trying to get a sense of how they might be able to help you. And for all you know, they may have a very specific procedure in place to do so. So the first place is to make that list, figure out who is willing to help you and put those in one bucket, and then maybe quarantine off the other section of people who are not willing to help you, and that can be a different conversation, maybe one you want to talk with a lawyer about. Pro tip when you are doing these individual negotiations, right? For lawyers, negotiating is an art form. It's something that we train to do and to do well. We're careful about how we speak. We're intentional about what we write down and the words we use. So while it's a good idea to try to have a conversation with folks one-on-one on your own, you want to be careful in what's said, and you want to be careful to make sure you're protecting yourself and that you've got a paper trail. For instance, some contracts require that any type of modification be in writing and require notice. And so maybe you're given permission orally or verbally from someone to do something outside of the contract, but it might make sense that that's written down, and there might be a little bit of formality required. So a pro tip as you're doing these negotiations one-on-one, just be very careful and make sure that if a paper trail is required, that you're intentional about how you lay that paper trail. And if you're doing back and forth communications with someone and it is being written down, just think in everything that you write and say, how might a judge interpret this? How might a formal authority who is reading my words receive them? And be very careful about how you go about that process. All right, so the big ticket item is the SBA loans. It's a conversation that is really key, and especially today, the news has been kind of giving us a lot of input since yesterday about the SBA loan funding being dried up. And we're all wondering if there's going to be additional funding. Most of the experts suggest that there is going to be additional funding. And so worthwhile for us to go through what your options are now in a general way so that you can start to prepare in the event that it makes sense for you to pursue these particular opportunities and to the extent they're available for you to pursue. So the CARES Act was passed into law in the end of March. It was signed into law the end of March, and it provided for two big ticket options that the news has sort of taken a hold of and that most people are interested in for small business owners, and that is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. Some folks have gotten to calling this the EIDL or EIDL, E-I-D-L, and then the Paycheck Protection Program. The EIDL isn't necessarily new. It's been around for a while, but a big piece of interest here is the EIDL Advance, and that's the one we're going to talk about it a little bit more. But the highlight for the EIDL has been this $10,000 amount that initially was suggested would be wired in your account within three days of submitting the application. We came to find that the 3 days really wasn't accurate. Some folks are receiving the advance even today after all of the reports of no funding being left. So it could be the case that even though these reports are coming through, perhaps an advance might come through for you. We got reports today that some of our clients received the EIDL advance proceeds deposited into their account this morning. So the two big ticket items are the EIDL and the PPP, and let's talk about both of those a little bit. At this point, we've got the EIDL, which is going to be backed by the SBA and the US Treasury, and then separate from that, and same for the EIDL advance, and separate from that is the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program. And to apply for this particular funding, right, you're going to go through an SBA approved lender. That difference caused some confusion for folks. For the EIDL and the EIDL advance, you're going to be applying directly through the SBA website. And for both of these options, you want to make sure that you are careful and intentional about where you're applying. We want to make sure that we're not putting sensitive information in the wrong place on the internet. So we want to be very intentional about where we're applying, but if you go directly to the SBA website, that's where you were able to find the applications for the EIDL. And the application process for the EIDL was very simple. I think it ended up being a couple of pages, and most people were able to finish it within 10-15 minutes, so it's pretty straightforward. But for both of these options, it's a good idea to consider chatting with your accountant and whoever is helping you with your books. If you've got financial advisors, if you've got lawyers on your team, to really sit down and be strategic about which option makes sense for you. But generally, as we've got displayed on this PowerPoint slide here, the big ticket items, are as follows. You need to be a small business under 500. And then there's some exceptions there as well, but generally speaking, that's been negatively impacted by COVID-19, which at this point is most small businesses. And for the EIDL, we're talking about a $2 million max amount, and the advance of $10,000, which was initially thought to be, you would receive the full $10,000. But the SBA provided some additional guidance recently saying that the advance amount would be $1,000 per employee. So you want to make sure.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I wasn't sure if maybe the screen was supposed to be at a different slide. I think right now we're just seeing the keeping your business afloat, so I wasn't sure if you were changing it yet or not.
Oh, thank you for pointing.
Sorry for the interruption.
Yes, thank you for pointing that out. We are actually on different slides. Can you see?
Okay, now I see it. Yeah.
Okay,
Now I see the different one.
perfect. Thank you very much for letting me know that.
Got it.
Okay. And then if there's any other issues with the PowerPoint, please definitely let me know. Thank you so much. Okay, so with these two options, like we mentioned, the general details are here, and at this point, pretty clear and well established. In terms of the EIDL advance, it's important to note, and I think that most people know this at this point, that amount that you receive up to $10,000, not necessarily a guaranteed $10,000, doesn't have to be paid back, even if you end up not receiving the loan. So that's an important consideration there. And then for the PPP, we're talking a maximum amount of up to 10 million. And there is the forgiveness component of the PPP, which is of particular interest. And that is once you receive the funds, once they're distributed to your account for the PPP, for the next 8 weeks of operations, certain amount of funding will be forgivable, will be forgiven. And here's an important piece here, right? The forgiveness is not necessarily guaranteed. You want to make sure that you're using the money for permissible reasons, right? So payroll, of course, utilities, rent, etc., and in the appropriate amounts. And at this point, we really haven't gotten our hands on the forgiveness application. But ultimately, what you need to be aware of is that applying for forgiveness is going to include just that, an application, a process. And so you want to make sure that you keep very detailed records about how you're using these proceeds once you get them. It's been recommended that once you get the money, consider opening another bank account and putting the full amount of the loan there. And then, making sure that you are understanding what are permissible uses, staying up to date with any updates in the law, so that you're using the funds correctly and you can get the maximum amount of forgiveness once this plays out for those individuals who have already gotten the PPP or who intend to get it and already received that notification. Okay. All right, some questions that, or some things to highlight, some things worthy of note. For the EIDL, in terms of a personal guarantee, you don't need to guarantee loan amounts up to 200K. For PPP, a personal guarantee is not required. And so that's a good and important detail to note. We talked a little bit about forgiveness generally, but it's a place where you really want to be careful, again, with your record keeping. In terms of the term of the loan and your ability to pay it back over time, you want to consider that as well. The EIDL term is substantially larger than the PPP. So with the EIDL, we've got a 30-year term, and with the PPP, we've got a 2-year term. So important considerations there as well, speaking again very generally with details like the ones on this slide, which are readily available at different websites. And honestly, the best place to be looking is the SBA website. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a moment. And if you have any questions, please go ahead and feel free to chime in or throw them in the chat. And if you are appearing, if you're listening to this after the fact, and you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'll place the contact information here at the end. All right, so additional strategies around all of this general information that I know most of you have probably already heard. Choosing the right lender is key. Strategy is important here, in particular for the PPP, of course. In terms of calculating the amount of the loan, which is the average payroll that you have for W-2 employees, and taking that average and timesing it by 2.5. Some lenders were looking at an average taken from 2019, and some lenders were looking at a 12-month period taken from the time you submitted the loan. And so for some of our business clients, that can be a real big difference in terms of the overall amount of the loan that you might receive. It's important to note, because I think there was some confusion about this initially, it is not a requirement that you submit your application through the bank that you regularly use. Certainly the case that it might be easier, or that some banks like Bank of America were providing options specific for their business account holders, but it's not necessarily the case that, let's say, you bank with Wells Fargo and they're closing things down, you just don't want to work with them, that you couldn't work with a different lender. And so what we're seeing from more sophisticated clients is a good amount of strategy that goes into choosing the right lender and setting things up so that you can maximize the amount of loan that you're eligible to receive. And again, this can be a conversation with your accountant, with your business team, to really think through this rather than bum rush the application doors, which we know right now are closed in terms of the funding issues. But rather than kind of bum rush things, I'm always an advocate of being a little bit more intentional and thinking through the long-term strategy. It's also important to note that in terms of these loans, who you go to the party with, you've got to leave the party with. So your lender is going to be in charge of deciding what gets forgiven and what doesn't in terms of the line item, of course, following and applying the law. But they're going to have the say in that. And so you want to make sure that you're working with a lender that you're comfortable with and is, above board and all that good stuff. Okay. In terms of forgiveness, I mentioned this a little bit. We're really going to want to be clear and intentional about how we are using this money. And another thing to consider, and that causes me concern at times, is orientation and reminder of the difference between a primary source like the law, the actual CARES Act, 800 plus pages. I'm not saying that it would be a fun thing for you to read, but it's a primary source where you can attempt to rely on what is the information gleaned from the CARES Act to the extent that you can understand it. Certainly interpretation is still required, rather than a secondary source, which is, a news publication summarizing the CARES Act. We've gotten a lot of different intel and just, quite frankly, wrong information shared with us on repeat from individuals who call our firm, or just personal contacts that I know, saying, I'm guaranteed $10,000, $10,000 advance, the government's going to send that to me in 3 days. And a question on our end is, well, where did you get that from? So just be careful about looking to and making sure you're trusting a primary source and questioning the secondary sources that you are relying on. And if you don't want to read the 800 plus pages of the CARES Act, this is perfectly fine. Just make sure that you're getting the right information from trustworthy sources is the overall takeaway there. Another thing I wanted to touch on, because I think there's some confusion here, is this idea of agency fees or someone charging you a separate application fee to submit one of these applications, either EIDL or PPP, on your behalf. We have seen some consulting companies charging upwards of $5,000, $7,000, $10,000 to individuals or businesses to help them simply submit the application. And certainly I'm not knocking any valid and lawful ways that some of these industries are adding value to their consumers and their clients, but we want to make sure that we're not being scammed in terms of paying someone to do something that you don't necessarily need an expert to do. And you really want to understand the offering when somebody is charging you an application fee, because application fees are not required. And to the extent you see that, I think it should raise a big red flag and cause you to ask a lot of follow-up questions. So that's application fees generally. And then let's talk about agency fees. Fees paid to an agent. The CARES Act allowed for certain agents to collect an agent fee, attorneys, accountants, consultants, to the extent that they help in preparing and helping a client submit the PPP application. Once that information came out and folks started to understand it, I think that there was a little bit of an uptick in companies thinking that they were going to provide this service in mass. And so I saw some marketing efforts around this. And so whatever end of the aisle you're on, whether you're having someone help you submit this application or whether you're trying to collect some of these fees, understand that the way that it would work under the rule is it's a 1% fee based on the overall amount of the loan, and it's not deducted from the overall amount of the loan. It would be paid by the lender to the agent, so long as the agent is properly identified. Generally, that's how that process would work. But there's a huge but there, and that is, most lenders got wind of this and they're already boggled down by a lot here, and they restricted payment of agent fees. So to the extent that you're wanting to provide these services or that you're working with someone who is expecting that you list them as an agent, or just for general knowledge, it's important to know that from what we've seen, most lenders are not paying these fees. So make sure that you wrap your head around that and you understand the difference between them and that you're asking the right questions there. And then lastly, and I think it bears repeating, even though I already mentioned this, really be careful about where you're submitting sensitive documents. There's a lot of scams going on right now. And for most lenders, they're going to require you to submit, once you get your application processed and going, sensitive information through a secure portal. So if you see something that's, more secure, then this is good. If you're seeing any type of anything that causes you concern or pause, take a step back and don't disclose sensitive information until you're really sure that that's the appropriate place to send certain documents. In terms of compiling documents, here is a bit of a checklist on things that it would be good for you to have. Generally, it's a good idea to have all of these in different, digital folders and your paper files, one way or the other. So even if you don't end up getting one of these loans, it's a worthwhile effort to spend some time compiling any of these things in relation to your business overall. And so general things that you're going to want to keep are things like your EIN number, personal tax returns, business tax returns. For now, at least for the last 3 years, a good thing for you to have in a folder, your registration documents from the state where you registered your entity, any other corporate documents, things like bylaws, operating agreement, etc. Depending on the type of entity you formed, you're going to want to pull all that. Your financial statements, any copies of agreements or notes or other types of obligations that your company has, you want to start teeing that up and have a folder with all of that ready to go to the extent that it's requested. Same thing with regard to list of who have your employees been in 2019 and up to more recently. What are your payroll expenses? To the extent you're working with a payroll provider, you're going to want to pull all of those records, and that's not too difficult of a thing to do. But drilling down even further, you may want to keep copies of, or pull copies of things like your written job descriptions. The more you can pull in terms of your personal files and your personal record, the easier and more streamlined of a process you'll have in terms of giving that information to a lender to the extent they're asking it initially, or to the extent they have follow-up questions and want supplemental documents that maybe they did not initially request. The more information you have on file, the better. All right. Generally speaking, for the EIDL, we're applying on the SBA website, and for PPP, we're applying through an SBA qualified lender. Okay. And an additional thing I wanted to chat about was not to forget about free money grants. There are a lot of different grant programs that are popping up right now, and it's useful to consider those as an option and to be paying attention to what's happening. A lot of these, the deadlines are moving really swiftly because they want to get money into the hands of business owners and individuals quickly. But just a few that we've seen highlighted, we've got the Facebook small business grants, Hello Alice small business grants, Verizon put out a program, Salesforce put out a program more locally, United Way released the Miami Pandemic Assistance Program. So there is a lot there other than just the big ticket SBA loan options, the EIDL and the PPP. And to the extent that you're interested, you can email us and we're happy to provide you this information, or follow our social media accounts. We're trying to post and share this information and make sure that folks know about these opportunities before the deadlines lapse. Also, if you are not aware, here are some kind of unique resources that I think are really great. The Nootropic is a e-newsletter that goes out. It's really innovative and creative, and they post, they email regular updates to their readership. You can find them, just Google the Nootropic. And I think they do a really good job of providing localized intel. And so this is specific for South Florida, though there are different cities that have similar offerings as well. And they also have a specialized COVID-19 bulletin board on their website, which provides really great and, again, super localized opportunities down to volunteer efforts that you could, help out with to the extent that's of interest to you. And then same thing, local grants to the extent that, just finding funding is your main concern. That's a good place you could go. There's also a good website, accesshelp.org. And you can find a list of resources for Miami-Dade and Broward there, and they have it set up where you click on options that are applicable to you, and then the software sort of spits out options and resources, again, specific to you. That's how they designed it to work. And so it's pretty user-friendly and free. And then Miami-Dade Beacon Council has been putting out really great information as well. So those are just 3 choices. There are a lot more than that to help you stay informed that we like and that we recommend. And to the extent you know of any helpful resources, you can, for the folks who are here with us now, throw it into the chat, or just otherwise share the information on social media with your friends. I think the best thing that all of us can be doing right now is supporting one another, even though we're socially distant. To the extent you see something that could help someone else, share it. Any questions?
Wow, thank you, Kristen. That was so much information. While you guys are formulating your questions in there too, I'm going to paste in the link for the Facebook grant. I think it's such a wonderful program. They're granting over 100 million, I think it is, 100 million in cash grants. I think you have to be like between 2 and 50 employees there. So it's not like, there's not a lot of borrowing to it, which is great. But thank you so much for sharing those resources. If you guys have any questions, now is a great time to ask, whether it's for yourself or for somebody else that you might know, and try to keep them as general as possible. If you have any personal questions for our attorney, make sure that you get this information down as well. I think I have a question actually that I'll just ask in here, and that is, how many businesses, I mean, obviously you work with solely businesses, how many businesses are you seeing really take advantage of this program? Do you feel like a lot of them don't even know that this is really available to them?
It's a really great question, and it's perfectly timed here at the end of the presentation, because it allows me to loop back to that first piece, which is mindset, which I know you do a great job at. And I think that we're seeing kind of 2 tiers. We're seeing some small business owners just take their foot off of the gas entirely. And I empathize and I get the struggle right now. I really do. This is not an easy time for anyone. We all know that. But for those folks, I don't think that they're as aware because they're not trying to be, of all of the opportunities out there to really help them. So I think that's one group. And then we've got some folks who are just, really pushing and trying to find any way that they can to keep things afloat, to make sure that their business does not die, even in the face of a pandemic. And I think that those business owners they're the ones who, preaching to the choir here with those watching webinars, trying to educate themselves, and really just understanding every option, not just relying on any one thing to save them. So I think those are the two buckets we see. We have seen our clients of ours and other business owners that we know actually receive this money, both the EIDL advance, which has been a bit of a mystery for everyone, and the PPP, the largest PPP loan that we've seen, fully closed and paid. It's over $750,000. So, there are people who are getting these funds, and I really do hope that more will continue to get them, because this is crucial. And I understand the frustration for people who applied and haven't heard back or see these doors closing. I hope they open back up. I hope more money is pumped into this, because I know so many small business owners really need this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so glad that you included the mindset portion of it, because hashtag mindset is everything. So it's very important, law or not, right? So guys, I definitely understand if you have questions that are more specific to your case and you may not want to ask them publicly, so please reach out to Kristen. All of her information is on here. She's very, very active in the community. So she's just a fantastic person just to connect with. And I'm sure you welcome connections, whether they are direct to business or not, right? So it'll be fantastic to connect with Kristen. And if there are no other questions, guys, again, this is recorded and it will be sent to you as a replay as well. So you have all that information. And please make sure that you connect with each other and with Kristen as well. So if there's no more questions, guys, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you so much. This was really wonderful. And guys, have a wonderful weekend. I know it feels like we've been the weekending for the last couple of weeks, but I hope you do have a peaceful weekend and enjoy it.
Yeah, Christina, I just wanted to close out by saying thank you so much to you and Lauren and RainmakersConnect for doing this. And to the extent that folks have any follow-up questions, I'm happy to connect via email, info@corplaw.us. Give us a phone call, 1-833-545-7526, or on any of our social media channels.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much for attending this. Bye-bye.